Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 7 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. I've just got a few cards today, but there's some pretty nifty ones, so I wanted to go ahead and get a video out as soon as I could. Starting off with Mukla, Tyrant of the Vale. This is a 6-mana neutral legendary. 5/5 in stats, has the Beast tribal affiliation and the battle cry, add 2 bananas to your hand. Now, I've seen some reactions on the internet to this card that are not particularly positive. In fact, they're pretty negative, saying just a little too slow, it's instant disenchantment fodder. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that this is a solid card and could see some play in actually a handful of different decks and classes. First things first, a 5/5 for 6 is not particularly exciting when it comes to stats, but it falls in line with so many other good 6-drops like Emperor Thaurissan, Sylvanas, for instance, that also have that 5/5 stat allocation. So just because it's not like a 5/7, I don't think that's a big penalty necessarily. I think it's just fine. But it's the battle cry, to me, that actually puts this over the edge. The 2 bananas are going to be seemingly the same as the current Mukla's bananas, which you give to your opponent, in that they're a 1-mana spell that buffs 1/1 on any given minion. So you get 2 of those, 2 1-mana spells with 1/1 buffs. So that means for 8 mana, right, you can turn Mukla into a 7/7, which is not an exciting 8-mana play either, but it's not all about just Mukla. It's about using 2 free 1-mana spells that's so darn good. So many different classes benefit from very cheap spells, particularly like mages. Tempo Mage could use cheap spells, like with Archmage Antonidas, for instance. It's also great in Rogue for combo potential and Gadgetzan Auctioneer, Synergy, and all that fun stuff. This is also a Beast card, which means I think it could be good in Hunter and perhaps even Beast Druid decks. It seems like Blizzard is creating some Beast Synergy cards that are all about buffs as well, so this is more buffs. I could maybe even see a world where like a Gadgetzan Beast Druid is a thing, and that's kind of one thing I want to try as soon as Whispers of the Old Gods gets here. But so there are essentially a few different angles I think Mukla, Tyrant of the Vale, could fit into. He gives you spells, he's got a decent body, he's got beast synergy. When you add all that together, it feels like maybe this is a decent card that could see play in a handful of different places. So I definitely haven't given up on Mukla, Tyrant of the Vale. I kind of put him in the same class as a card like Toshli, which is certainly not like an overpowered card that sees play all the time, but it does show up from time to time in certain decks. And I think that's where Mukla will fall, so I wouldn't disenchant this one right away. I'd hold on to it because I feel like Mukla might carve out a spot in the meta here or there. Up next is the 5-mana Cult Apothecary. This is a 5-mana 4/4 with the battle cry for each enemy minion, restore 2 health to your hero. So in many ways, I guess this is kind of designed to be the replacement for Antique Healbot, which will be getting phased out in the standard format in particular. And in some ways, I think it's a suitable, apt replacement, but in other ways, I think it's going to fail. First comparison to make is that it's a 4/4 for 5 mana instead of a 3/3, and that's actually a significant difference. 4 health is much sturdier than 3 health. So many things kill a 3 health minion that don't quite take care of a 4 health minion. So the attack is nice too, but it's really that 4 versus 3 health that matters. So this is more likely to trade into an aggressive board effectively than would an Antique Healbot. Typically when you play that Antique Healbot, it dies to like 1 card or 1 minion that your opponent has, or just like a Lightning Bolt or Frostbolt or whatever it might be. This might require 2 cards or 2 minions from time to time, which does help slow down your opponents. So that's not an insignificant difference. And it's really the battle cry, of course, where the cards are so different. The great thing about Antique Healbot is that it's a guaranteed 8 health no matter what. So it's good on turn 5 if your opponent has a solid board, just because it's an instant heal. You get a minion out, but it's also good, Antique Healbot that is, it's also good in the late game. After you've stabilized, it helps you recover and prevent any crazy burst damage where they have like double fireballs in their hand and they just finish you off. Cult Apothecary, on the other hand, won't be good in those situations. Once you've stabilized and cleared off your opponent's board, you're less likely to get a payoff from Cult Apothecary. So he's really only good on curve when they still have that board that you haven't taken care of just yet. Now that said, they might play a minion or two on any given turn, so you might heal for 2 or 4 in the late game, but that might not be enough to get you past the burst range. I mean, think about Freeze Mage, for instance, right? This card is terrible against Freeze Mage because they hardly ever play minions, whereas Anti-Healbot is clutch against Freeze Mage because it doesn't matter if they have minions or not. So the conditional nature of this does mean it could heal you for 14 if they had a 7 minion board, but 14 versus 8 when they've got 7 minions on the board it probably means you're going to lose anyway. So the upsides here with Cult Apothecary aren't all that great, and the downside with the conditional battle cry that Anti-Killbot didn't have, I think makes this a fairly worse card. So it's designed to be a counter to like really aggressive aggro decks, and that will work from time to time, but there's other times where the flexibility of this card just won't make it great on the ladder. Maybe they'll see play in like competitive tournament settings and you're trying to just hard counter some aggressive decks, but the lack of flexibility makes it an awkward card for laddering most likely. So there's certainly some potential in Cult Apothecary, don't get me wrong. I just think it's inferior to Anti-Healbot and a little weaker overall. Moving on to the final card for this video. As I mentioned, I just had 3. I wanted to get out real quickly, particularly because this card is so unbelievably crazy, I can't believe it's even real. The 8-mana Ragnaros Lightlord. Instead of Ragnaros the Fire Lord, this is Ragnaros Lightlord. It's also an 8/8 minion, much like Ragnaros, but you'll note it is only a Paladin card, not a neutral legendary, as Ragnaros would be. And it has a very different effect, in fact an opposite effect. At the end of your turn, restore 8 health to a damaged friendly character. And you'll note one other thing that's absent from this card, it does not say can't attack. Ragnaros, of course, can't attack. He can only shoot those 8 damage bombs until you silence him. This one can attack, so there's no downside there. And you're healing 8 instead of dealing 8. So it's a very different card than Ragnaros, and it serves a very different purpose. It's really not all that comparable to Ragnaros at all in that regard. It's actually another card which you could kind of compare to Anti-Healbot or some other Paladin heal minion cards that exist out there. But it's an 8 mana, so it's a giant-bodied one. I think the only way this card is super viable is if Big Game Hunter does indeed get nerfed with standard format, as has been hinted. Otherwise, committing an 8 mana 8/8 is going to be punishing if it gets cleared really quickly, particularly because although the effect is instant, it isn't necessarily all that impactful for 8 mana. In other words, an 8 mana heal doesn't do a lot if they can take care of this thing for 3 mana with a Shadow Word Death and just keep loading up the board with additional minions. So this needs to stick around for a turn or two, potentially, to get value. You'll also note that it's not always just 8 health to your face. It can also be 8 health to a friendly minion if it's damaged, so there are some potential conflicts there where you heal a minion that has taken like 1 damage of health when you really want the 8 health to your face. All that said, I still think this could see some play in really late game control style Paladin decks. It's just another heal card that buys them time, while also depositing a pretty big threat onto the board. It's definitely no Tyrian Forging as far as quality is concerned, but I think it might see play here and there. If nothing else, no one is ever going to disenchant this card, and everyone's going to want to put it into their deck just because it has the most ridiculous fantasy and very cool artwork to go along with it. So I think Ragnaros Lightlord will definitely be a popular choice for the first few weeks of the Whispers of the Old Gods metagame, but might drop off a little bit shortly thereafter. And it could just be too slow to counter aggro, and because that's another thing I didn't mention. Even if you heal for 8 and you have an 8/8 attacking, an 8/8 doesn't trade very effectively into 7/1/1s. So getting it onto the board with a heal means you're dedicating so much mana to its stats that you might just get ran over anyway because you can't stop the onslaught that the opponent has laid out before you. So that's another downside here. But we'll see. I have hope for Ragnaros Lightlord because I think it is an incredibly cool card. So that wraps it up for this video. That was Mukla, Tyrant of the Vale, Cult Apothecary, and Ragnaros Lightlord. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions about these cards, just let me know. I'm happy to discuss them in greater detail. And until next time, game on.